Shall we start, Andrea?
Yes, let's go.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the webinar, Design Meets Business, Creating a New Kind of Leadership. It's a conversation between me. I'm Mattia Bianchi. I'm a professor of innovation management at the House of Innovation, which is an institution within the Stockholm School of Economics. And of course, Michael Treschow. Michael is one of the most influential business leaders in Sweden. Throughout the years, he has contributed to, bring companies like Atlas Copco, Ericsson, Electrolux, Unilever in the leadership positions where they are today. And Michael is the sponsor of a scholarship, the Michael Treschow Scholarship, that every year gives 100,000 Swedish crowns to a design student who wishes to continue his or her education at the master level. The scholarship has been introduced in 2003, and since then it has awarded 15 brilliant designers. So the main goal with this conversation is to speak to the design students who are listening to us this morning and encourage them to apply for the scholarship, because it's a great tool to realize your talent and put it into productive use. This is the outline for the webinar. I will give you some information about the institution that is hosting the Michael Treschow Scholarship, the institution I work for. And then we move to the core topic of today's webinar, which is an illustration of how two fields, two important fields, design and business, are coming together. And it's basically about design, its concepts and tools, supporting businesses to be more innovative and successful. It will be a conversation between me and Michael. I will introduce a few concepts, some information, and then Michael will comment on those. Finally, we conclude the webinar with a Q&A. So I kindly ask you to note down the questions you have and save them for the last part of the webinar, where Michael and myself will be happy to discuss with you additional topics or clear your doubts, if we can, of course. The goal is, of course, to finish by 10. Few words about the Stockholm School of Economics. We are, according to the Financial Times rankings, the leading business school in the Nordics. And we exist since 1909 with the mission to strengthen the competitiveness of Sweden through science and education. Don't get me wrong, we are a very international school. Our students, our faculty, our projects are international in their DNA, but we have still, and we will continue having a strong emphasis in terms of contributing to Swedish society, Swedish business community and industry. The school has identified 4 strategic areas, which is finance, retail, innovation, and sustainability. And today, of course, we focus on innovation. And the department, the institution that is responsible for doing research and education in innovation at the Stockholm School of Economics is the House of Innovation. Okay. The House of Innovation has been generously funded by the Erling Persson Family Foundation, Scania, and the Wallenberg Foundations, together with a consortium of partner companies. At the House of Innovation, we do research on innovation in a broad sense. Innovation not only as the development of new products and services and business models, but also we look at startups, at entrepreneurial ecosystems. We study the role of information technology, of digital platforms of service design in terms of fostering higher innovation within companies and societies. We run high quality courses and master programs with a focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, and digitalization. We are more than an academic department because we want to have a broad and extensive impact on society and on the industry. So we have a business incubator where we basically have startups founded by our students or alumni. We are part of the Stockholm School of Entrepreneurship, which is a consortium of the five major universities in Stockholm. And we have multiple research centers, each focusing on a specific innovation team. One example of such research center is the Garden. The Garden is a center that works at the intersection between innovation, leadership, and design. And I work there as co-director together with Roberto Verganti, Professor Roberto Verganti, who has founded the center together with me. What we're trying to do there is to understand how design, whether and how design can contribute to better innovation and superior leadership in business organizations. So of course, the Garden is a natural roof for hosting and for helping Michael and Adele Treschow running their scholarship. This was introduction about the institution, and let me state upfront what's the goal and the message from this morning webinar. Basically, we are speaking to you design students, and we are trying to basically communicate to you that you possess very advanced skills, toolkits, mindsets that are extremely valuable, of course, for a career in design, but also for a career in business. In fact, today, businesses are increasingly tapping into design concepts in order to improve the way they work, the way they innovate. And in the following slides, Michael and I are gonna give you some more information about how this is happening. And if you find the topic exciting and interesting, and you wanna try to pursue it, then the Michael Treschow Scholarship is a great tool. And you should apply to that because it will increase your chances to make an impact in a business world also. So let's start talking about how these two important fields like design and business are coming together and in what way. Basically, design has become a business watchword. It's on everyone's lips in the world of business. Large companies like Pepsi are creating roles, the role of chief design officers. We see a big number of special issues in very influential journals, business journals like Harvard Business Review. There are TV shows and tech talks addressing how design is influencing business. What you see here is the fact that many leading consulting firms, the big ones, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Bain, Accenture, are acquiring a lot of design agencies in order to add design expertise and tools and knowledge to their portfolio of services they offer to their clients. And of course, when we talk about design in business, we basically talk about design thinking. So the actual approach that has contributed to bring design to the table in the business world has a specific name, and that's design thinking. It's basically about using the mindset and toolkit that is typical of designers to solve business problems in a creative way. Learning about how designers think and act to create something novel in a business organization. What you can see here is a significant growth in the number of scientific articles about design thinking. That's the figure on the left, and also how popular design thinking is as a keyword for a Google search. Also compared to other popular management concepts like open innovation and blue ocean strategy. Let me state, of course, that there is an element of fashion in the popularity of design thinking, and that's the case with almost any new management concept that is introduced. But I strongly believe that once we remove the mumbo jumbo surrounding design thinking, that this kind of mumbo jumbo that might help sell additional consulting projects, once we remove that, we still have very solid and original concepts that can have a beneficial impact on businesses. And in the following slides, I'm gonna articulate these principles more deeply. But it seems like because of the times we live in today, characterized by frequent, radical, and unexpected changes, there is value in thinking and acting as designers. So here comes my first question to Michael. And the question is, why is this happening? Why are businesses interested in the designer's way of working, way of thinking? What is it that managers can learn from designers? And I leave the floor to you, Michael.
Can you hear me and see me? I don't know.
Yes.
But let's,
yes.
I think the important is actually to take a step aside and say, what are businesses or business organization normally good at? And I think it's good at processes, good at discipline, good at planning. But I think there is one element that we lack a lot, and that is creativity. I don't know where creativity is lost from childhood up to maturity. And I think that we are probably too disciplined and too process oriented. In that sense, I have learned over the years with my scholarship, etc., to understand that design thinking has a more disciplined process of creativity. And I believe that creativity is fundamental for having true innovation. When we talk about innovation, it's easy to sort of say it's a little better than it was. But to take big steps, you need to have a big portion of creativity. And that's why I think design thinking could help business on that.
Thank you, Michael. So it's really this combination between creativity coming from the world of design and discipline that is quite typical of organizations. So discipline and structure, not killing creativity, but actually channeling it into a more effective impact. Google has a principle that says creativity loves constraints. We tend to think that constraints kill creativity, but actually they can have a boosting effect on creativity. You know, focusing your creativity efforts within a well-defined structure, so you can explore but in a more guided way.
And that's why I hope that we will add more creativity to normal business, not take away creativity from design thinking. Perhaps even dare to have a little more of creativity in design thinking, so it doesn't become too disciplined.
Yes. Thank you, Michael. And you know, just to reinforce what you are saying, let me just show what McKinsey is doing. McKinsey, probably the leading consulting firm in the world. They really believe design is critical for their operations in the future. So they have developed this design index, which rates the companies in terms of a number of principles that are somehow characteristic of design: continuous iteration, working in sprints, in iterations, not linearly; cross-functional talent, pulling up teams that have multiple types of expertise and skills; user experience, of course, putting the user at the center; and analytical leadership. So, you know, looking at the details and what the numbers and the data are telling us. And they show, they show, using their big database of more than 2 million financial data points, that companies that have a higher design index perform better financially. They have higher revenues compared to the rest of the companies, and they also have higher total returns to shareholders. But let me go deeper in terms of what role can design have on the way businesses innovate. When I say innovate, I mean how they come up with new offerings, be them products, services, business models, processes, systems, organizational structures, and so on. And my thesis is that when we use a traditional management approach to innovation, we have a lot of issues that design principles and methods can help mitigate or solve. What is the traditional way of innovating in a management sense? Well, basically, it goes by the name of stage gate. This is a very popular framework. It's been around since the 80s, and it approaches innovation as a linear process from ideation to launch to the market. So you start with the problem, typically in the form of unmet customer needs, and then you brainstorm possible solution ideas, and then you converge on the ones that are most promising. You develop them, you test them, and finally you launch the output, the innovative output on the market. You can see this diamond in the background. Yes, because you have first a divergent phase where you brainstorm, you create multiple ideas, but then you have a convergence phase when you select the idea and then you work on it. It sounds, of course, a reasonable process, has been around for more than 30 years, adopted by leading companies. But what I can show you here is the fact that it has a lot of problems. Because when we look at innovation performance, we see that most radical innovation projects, when I say radical, I mean those projects that have a, that try to achieve a significant leap in performance. So those radical projects fail to meet targets. Almost 70% are delayed and they exceed budget, and half of them do not meet technical and market goals. Why is that? Well, there are, of course, many reasons, but let me mention a few. First of all, managers have this tendency to take problems for granted as a given. So someone is telling them, the marketing department, salespeople, some kind of industry reports that customers have this unmet need. They take it as a given and they immediately jump into solution mode. So we, as humans, tend to start immediately with solutions, jump right into the future, taking the problem for granted and rush into creating new stuff because that's exciting. Let's brainstorm, let's meet in a room and start writing brilliant ideas on Post-its. But with this approach, you might end up with brilliant answers, but just to the wrong questions. Solutions that are irrelevant. They don't have any traction on the market because they're addressing their own problem, more or less. Not the core essence of the matter. And it's a bit like Einstein used to say, if I have to save the world, I spend most of the time defining the problem. And when you have a clear, deep, informed definition of the problem, then finding the solution is not that difficult. So we need to spend time on the problem to deeply and broadly understand it before any solving effort. And design thinking, a designer's approach is really about, starting with the problem, spend energy on that, focusing on the here and now before we jump into the future and challenge the problem. You guys, you design students, have already this kind of trait within you more than your colleagues taking maybe a business degree have. Maybe this is a strong statement, but at the end of the day, that might be the case as far as we see in research. So the double diamond model is basically the design thinking translation of Einstein's suggestion into the world of business. So instead of having just the solution diamond that you have seen before, these divergence and conversions when it comes to brainstorming ideas, you also have a diamond before that. So the problem requires its own phase, and this phase has the shape of the diamond because you take the initial problem, but then you're not happy with that. You want to explore it, what is called painstorming. Trying to understand all the different pains. What I mean is customer needs that are unaddressed, all the different aspects surrounding the problem. And with that, you then try to reframe the problem, see the problem from different perspectives, because by doing so, you can come up with an original formulation of the problem that is already creative in itself, and it can already innovate what you're working with, because it opens up solution possibilities that were unexpected at the beginning of the project. You really get to the essence of the problem. You find the problem worth solving. So next question to Michael is really, in your opinion, Michael, in your experience, how important is a focus on needs, on the problem, the ability to see it from different angles, the ability to challenge the problem throughout the project and be somehow creative in the way you see it?
No, I think you really take a good point here, because I have experienced several times sitting in a group of people and coming up with a problem definition, and we thought that we were ready, and then there came in the end little input and new discussion, and the whole group changed opinion and agreed upon a new definition of the problem, and then a new little input on something, and then a big discussion, and again a big change of the whole group. to a new definition of the problem. And I think the most fantastic experience on that is when this has happened 4 times, then you really understand that you have not made a good definition or a good job on defining the problem. So I fully agree on that. And it's just a matter of how making sure and be very often the devil's advocate or somebody else and saying, is this the right one? Are we really? And then having a new discussion and make sure that you don't come to conclusion too early, but have an open discussion and making sure, is there new input? Are we really ready? And asking again, and be a little pain in the neck. Come on, are we really here? Have we really defined the problem?
Yes, so this is really flexibility. If you keep options open as late as possible, as early as necessary, because of course you don't want to be late on the market, but the later you make a commitment on something, the better it is, because you do it with better information. As long as, of course, you have a very efficient way to work after that. And of course, these iterative cycles allow you to, decide late without being late on the market. And there is really this continuous iteration that Michael was talking about.
But I think also, Mattia, I think that making sure that once you have really decided, full speed ahead, and make sure that there's not a lot of changes and thinking. If you have long projects, the big problem with long projects is that there's a lot of changes and it takes forever.
Absolutely. Great. I will continue with another issue that characterizes a typical management approach to innovation, the fact that we attempt to prioritize technology and business over people. And this is a beautiful animation that I took from Roberto and his group at Politecnico di Milano that are working on design and the way it influences business. And what you can see here is the fact that at the end, successful innovation happens at the intersection between people, business, and technology. Your innovation must be viable, so complies with business requirements of making profits. It has to be desirable to people, and it has to be feasible from a technological point of view. The management approach, of course, I mean, these are all important, but at the end, it matters what you prioritize, is because eventually there are going to be trade-offs between these dimensions. So what do you prioritize? A traditional approach, management approach, is where you prioritize business. That's your purpose. You have a goal, let's say 20% return on investment, and then you try to find out the innovations that allow you to achieve that kind of objective, financial objective. Or you start from technology, basically. You have some technology that comes from your R&D department after so many investments you have made, and now you are trying to find out what needs your technology can address. But this design thinking actually flips the equation. So it does a magic trick because it starts with people. As a designer, you put people first, and you start with making things that are desirable to people. The purpose is really to provide what people need and what is meaningful to them, and profit is a welcome consequence of, addressing fundamental people's needs. So design thinking is really starting with the people. They are front and center of any creative effort that a designer undertakes. Designers, when they need to get to know about the people they're innovating for, they don't use typical market research techniques, running big surveys, collecting a big volume of data, but they work with ethnographic techniques in order to develop empathy for the users. They observe them in the field. They immerse in the experience that users are having when interacting with a certain object. And they get to, by doing so, they end up caring and being genuinely interested in the life of the people they're innovating for. They want to know about their pains, their frustrations, their desires, their ambitions. And also, they focus on the social and emotional dimensions of the user experience, because often problems are not related to a function that is not performed properly by an existing object, but they have to do with the emotional and social dimension. This is a quote from a professor of marketing at Harvard that says, people don't want a drill, they want a hole. But wait a second, why do they want a hole? Well, they want it because they want to hang pictures on the wall. But is that really the ultimate reason? It's typically not, because they might want to, the fundamental reason might be that they want to share and memories with visitors to their apartment. They want to preserve memories by hanging them on the wall. So you see, as we ask why, we dig down into the essence of the problem, we get to fundamental human needs, and we also open up solution possibilities, because the drill is just one way that indirectly make sure you can preserve and share memories through pictures, but you can do it in many other ways, like maybe Instagram or any other technology, digital technology also that we have today, that allow you to address this fundamental need. So, Michael, another question for you is a little bit the dilemma we face today. If that's a dilemma, I'm not sure, but on one end, we have design thinking saying you should develop empathy for the users, and in order to do that, you need to work with small scale, very personal, intimate techniques. And on the other hand, we have exponential development in technology, digital technology, to collect huge amount of big data and then to process them through machine learning and artificial intelligence. How do you reconcile these two trends, these two dynamics? Are they two separate things that will, no matter what, depart? Or are there ways to reconcile them and bring them together?
I think you have a big point there, because business more and more, and I think you're doing a pretty good job in putting the customer first and focus on customer and on people, perhaps more on the definition of customer. And you put a good point on look at people. And of course, emotions are difficult to analyze. It is, how do you find out what people want when they haven't seen it or understand what your offering is? It comes back to the old anecdote on the birth of automobiles. When they asked people, they didn't say they wanted an automobile, they wanted a stronger horse, a better horse and a quicker horse and a stronger horse. So that's really, when you ask people, they ask for a better thing of what they have and know. That's why I believe it's much better to find ways to observe people in focus groups or whatever, rather than to ask them, because then, and that is where you get all this data, because you have asked people, and that data might be wrong because they don't understand the question. So it's much better if you can find an environment where you observe people in order to try to find a solution or try to define the problem.
So, I mean, because of somehow biases that are inherent in our human experience, no matter, you know, what kind of technology advancements we will have, there will still be a lot of value in a designer's approach to users research and to, you know, really find out fundamental emotions and the symbolic dimension.
What I've learned is when it works best for trying to make innovation in new, that put the team together with the designers, developers, and marketers, and try to go out and observe potential customers, and then they can come back with proposals.
So to have you know, multidisciplinary team that maybe they observe the same thing but with very different eyes, yeah, and lenses. Final issue, then we have a few other topics to discuss. The fact that managers tend to test too little too late. If you remember the stage gate model I showed you at the beginning, test was a stage, of course, in the innovation process, but one that was quite late in the innovation initiative. And when it comes to design thinking, a key principle is to visualize, prototype, and test whatever you have in mind as soon as possible. So when it comes to design thinking, there's a notion that in conditions of uncertainty, when you're trying to create novelty, be it advancing science or creating new products for the market, the best way to do so is running experiments. So you take your idea, surface all the assumptions behind that idea, the things that you believe to be true, but you're not really sure it's true. They're true. And then you develop you build a tangible, concrete representation that allow you to test these assumptions. And of course, nothing fancy, but something a little bit more realistic than you just telling what your idea is about. And by showing your quick and dirty prototype to users, you can get a reaction from them, one that is realistic, one that is full of valuable information, because through the prototype, you create a vivid image of the future in the minds of users. So this kind of information you get from prototyping and testing is so valuable, and it drives your development decisions later on. But of course, the logic of experimentation in design thinking is very different from the logic in stage gate, because here with design thinking, you test ideas when they're still rough, when they're still likely to fail, when they're still ugly. So it's a big cultural shock for developers, because basically it's very likely you're going to be embarrassed with what you present to users or to colleagues. And if that's not the case, you are prototyping and testing too late. That's hard for us to do because we don't want to look bad in front of customers, colleagues. So we spent a huge amount of time to build the sleek, expensive prototypes. And these, of course, will delay and reduce the benefits from testing. So even if companies are agree, and managers agree that experimentation is so important today, think about the principles that are behind other frameworks like lean startup or agile, they all build on the notion of early experimentation, exploratory experimentation. So even if they agree that experimentation is so important, they still struggle a lot with putting this principle into practice. Michael, question for you. Do you have any advice on, well, first of all, do you have an explanation for why experimentation is so difficult for organizations to implement in a designerly way? And also, do you have any advice as to how to build an experimentation from the start culture into organizations?
I think there is always an element, particularly in big organizations, of failure avoidance. And if that culture of failure avoidance is too strong, then actually, I mean, the evidence of experimentation, because it is really, you get a lot of failures on that one. And I think one needs to be very observant of failure avoidance elements and the culture, and making sure that you try to work with that. And that is really, if you can avoid that and more, not only say that failures or making mistakes are accepted, but you need to behave like that as well, which means you should more appreciate with the failures, or perhaps not the same failure all the time. But I mean, so it is a matter of culture in an organization, that if they welcome and really ask for failures and mistakes, that's not easy. That's not easy, because you want to succeed in business, but succeed needs to have failures and make mistakes. So it's really a cultural element in an organization.
Thank you, Michael. I mean, we've been advocating quite strongly for a designer approach to innovation, but let's be also let's be critical, or at least be open to the fact that design thinking is not a panacea for all the issues that companies have. And design thinking has attracted a fair share of criticism from the design community, actually. So from designers, what are the main critiques? Well, basically, some designers argue that design thinking is design for dummies, because look at the models of design thinking, the double diamond that I showed you before, or this model on the right in the slide from D school at Stanford, basically 5 hexagons in a linear structure. So this model of design thinking, according to designers, are a very simplistic version of how the design process occurs. And it's quite reasonable, because they need to be understood and used by managers who do not have a background in design. But according to designers, by making them so simplified, you are missing the whole point with design. The main characteristics like this, going back and forth, the looping circularity, the free-form exploration, the clashing between different views. So this is one critique, that in order to simplify, you get too far with the simplification that basically is not design any longer. And another critique is the fact that design thinking tends to have a weak track record. So there is a lot of hype around design thinking, but then when you go and look for innovations coming from a design thinking approach, you don't find many radical innovations, but typically incremental enhancements of products and services. And according to the detractors of design thinking, that's because, you know, at the end you are focusing on observing current behaviors. So then that might give you a better understanding of existing reality. So you tend to improve along a certain evolutionary trajectory. But on the other hand, you a little bit overlook the technological side of things. I mean, we have all these radical technological breakthroughs being created in R&D departments. And many radical innovations, such as the internet, laser, biotechnology, at the end come out of the labs. And sometimes, you know, people working on these radical technologies, advanced technologies, do not have a user in mind when they work on these inventions. They're very far from the market. They don't think about the commercial application of these technologies. But of course, over time, eventually, these technologies find a market, find a job to be done, find the use cases. But design thinking usually, as we have seen before with the triangle, takes another approach, starts with people. So what's your take on these critiques, Michael? Your view on, on the real potential of design thinking in business, and whether you share these critiques or you have basically ways to address them, like, you know, yes, maybe you have a point, but at the end, we need design into business.
No, I think that it is important not to fall in love with models and processes. And they are tools that help you, but they have weaknesses in itself as well. I think the importance here is really to stress creativity, because the element of creativity needs to be reinforced. So it's not just to try to follow a process. Then it can be easy to say that that is for dummies, but I mean, you have to really foster and ask for input and be creative. And that's a culture in itself, because that means that you more appreciate the stupid ideas. You appreciate the brainstorming, not forever, but I mean, in the problem solving, it is really a matter of creativity, and try to come up with views and ideas that are not self-evident. And if you are too disciplined and just follow a process or track, yes, you will get incrementally better product, but you won't get the real innovation. So it's more ask the question, come on, what's new? Think a little bigger and longer and broader. That means really ask for more creativity.
That's a very important point, Michael. And I have to say, existing research on the design thinking, also existing practice, has really focused on following the processes, these models, and a little bit like recipes. What we are seeing in the research platform, the Garden is part of, together with other European universities, like TU Delft, Politecnico di Milano, Imperial College Business School. We are seeing that today design thinking should be intended in a much broader way, and in particular at the cultural and organizational level. And it's not that different with from what happened with previous management frameworks. I mean, if you think about Lean, for many decades, it was very hard for Western companies to understand what Lean was really about. And they were focusing on tools and methods rather than on principles and values on a Kaizen culture of continuous improvement. It's only when you get to that level that you can really benefit from these management concepts. Okay, last part of our conversation before we move to the Q&A concluding section of the webinar. According to the work, especially of Roberto Verganti, who works at the Garden with me, the key contribution that design can bring to businesses today is really a leadership one, rather than a problem-solving one. What does he mean? Basically, he's arguing that the world is overcrowded with ideas, features, performance, technologies, and often this abundance of ideas, features, technologies do things that people don't need. And what he's claiming is that today we live in a different world than the world in the past. I mean, the world in the past was one where innovation was about finding ideas to solve a particular problem. And, you know, it was about the eureka moment, about having this brilliant idea. All the rest was dark until you managed to light up a bulb and have the inspiration to create a new offering. The world today looks more like this, where we have too much light. So many options, many possibilities, many alternatives, many ideas. So in a world like this, the challenge is not so much lighting up another neon light, but it's actually to find the most valuable idea, find the direction, find the meaning in what people want in their lives. So it's really about making sense of this abundance, develop a compass to navigate in this ocean of opportunities, to really find the ones that are most meaningful, most valuable, and then of course bring people on board to pursue this brilliant direction. So the point Roberto is making is that the nature of innovation is changing dramatically, and if today innovation is about finding a direction, then the innovation challenge today is very much a leadership one. It's a leadership challenge, and it's about searching for new meaning, which is really the job of leaders. And it's also the job of designers. So here, design and leaders come together because on one hand, design is not about deciding the look and feel of a product, but it's really about making sense of things, changing the world from current reality into a preferred state. And that's also what leaders do. So leaders and designers are often one and the same. Every designer think and implement about possible course of actions to change existing situations into preferred ones. And this is what leaders do as well. So leaders and designers face similar challenges, and because design has been, working on these challenges for a long time, probably in design we can find principles, concepts, and tools that can help us be better leaders in today's situation, which is one where companies are trying to find their purpose, their core reason for being. what they stand for. So a discussion on purpose is very timely today. Society wonders what companies are for, and they might expect companies to play their part when it comes to addressing fundamental grand challenges that the world is facing today, from climate change to inequality, resource depletion, immigration, and so on and so forth, but of course, healthcare and pandemics. So in August, the most influential CEOs in America met and stated that companies should pursue a mission that is aligned with what the world needs beyond profit. So combining business with purpose. What's your view, Michael, on this debate that is going on in society, within companies, on the importance of purpose before any strategy making, before any innovation initiative? The attempt to understand why we are doing what we're doing as a business organization.
I think this is a very important point in that sense, because it has been argued what's purpose with business, etc. For me, it's pretty simple. The purpose of whatever you do is to satisfy a need. It's not only for business, it is for your organization as well, Mattia, to satisfy a need. And business is not I'm not saying that business is there to make money. Business is there really, or my company or my companies are actually to satisfy a need, and making sure that you really understand what that need is. Comes back to the problem definition. What is the need of that consumer? What's the need of an automobile consumer? What's the need of a refrigerator or a vacuum cleaner consumer? What is the real need? And if you do that well, and if you satisfy your stakeholders, not the least your own people in your organization, of course, sub-suppliers and others as well. If you do that well, then you make money. And then the shareholders will be happy. It doesn't go the other way around. It really starts with to satisfy a need. And everyone can think about that. And if you do it well, you do it sustainable, etc., etc. I mean, you do it with great respect for your people and diversity, etc. All these things comes together when you satisfy a need and you do it well. And that becomes really the strong part of the leadership, that we start off by defining what need are we going to satisfy. And then we can discuss how we do it. And then we create the culture that we have been discussing this hour on making this well with the design thinking or creativity or avoid failure or whatever. But never forget that you do it with a result. You always have to measure result in order to know whether you do it well. And it doesn't have to be financial result. It can be any result. It can be people result or whatever. But you always need to understand that leadership is to lead result.
Yes, and again, it really goes back to what we've been discussing so far: the flipping, the triangle, the culture of a culture that is failure friendly. And you know, let me just reinforce what you said about focusing on fundamental needs. At the end, you know, that's kind of missing in the way companies are companies are thinking and working with their purpose. These are some statistics from studies made by McKinsey and PwC. What you can see is that, you know, majority of companies are working with their purpose. They're coming up with brilliant purpose statements. The problem is that these exercises often, you know, end up in high-minded, yes, but vague aspirations. Sometimes empty words, if you allow me. So some purpose statements are so generic that they could apply to any company, like enriching people's lives. So the problem is that they don't make an impact. They do not transform into value. They're not addressing those needs that Michael was talking about. They don't speak to what the firm actually does and who the customers are, and employees feel disconnected to it. So the point I want to make is that designers and design as a discipline think a lot about purpose and meaning, but it does it in a way that is quite different from the way traditional leaders, business leaders do. Design is about making sense of things. So designers think about purpose in relation to things. And in a business context, it's really about the products, the outputs of your organization, the products and services that you create and develop. These are your interface with the customers, is the channel through which you change people's lives. So design, with design purpose is human-centered and is very focused on the value proposition, value for customers. Some scholars, I think Gulati from Harvard Business School, if I'm not wrong, says your purpose is your promise to customers. So it should be clear with your purpose whose lives you're improving in some way and what value you deliver to them. And, you know, I know we tend to use Steve Jobs in many ways, many times, but Steve Jobs is really an example of putting purpose into products, developing insanely great products as the purpose, the fulfillment of purpose, and then putting profits as a nice consequence of that. So, you know, my passion has been to build a company where people were motivated to make great products. Everything else came secondary. Products were the motivation. And then Jobs talked about the CEO who kicked him off and then was leading Apple before he came back in '97. Scully, I think he came from either Pepsi or Coca-Cola, I don't remember, but of course brought this very different culture in the company that was then erased by Jobs. And of course, Scully had the opposite approach. And as Steve Jobs says, it's a subtle difference, but it ends up meaning everything. You know, the incentives you have in your company, what you discuss in meetings, what you do in your everyday operations. So let me conclude by saying that today the world requires companies to some extent to combine a business and society. I mean, having this dual purpose. But in a traditional leadership approach, you achieve this dual purpose of business and society by just putting one next to each other. So what do? You typically have these collateral mechanisms like CSR, corporate philanthropy. These are very important activities, but they're kind of on the side, at the margin. And they work well when you are in very good economic times. But when things get a bit rough, like today, of course, trade-offs and conflicts between social and profit goals start emerging. And it's quite, unfortunately, typical that managers tend to prioritize profits over society eventually when waters become very stormy. With a design approach to purpose, I think it's very powerful because you achieve a dual purpose where business becomes becomes the same as society, as your work on people. You do well by doing good, because you basically achieve this dual purpose through your core business, through exactly what you do for the market, which is addressing human needs by developing meaningful products and services, meaningful for your people and for the society. So again, you do well by doing good, and I think this is a nice way to close the conversation. The next slide is about the scholarship, some administrative information about that. And once Andrea is done with talking about that, Michael and I are happy to open up some Q&A discussion.
Yes, so hello everybody, my name is Andrea Nilsson. I work with Mattia also at House of Innovation. Before I start talking about the administrative part, I would like Michael to tell us a little bit about the idea behind the scholarship, why it is important, and why should students apply to it.
Yes, I would be happy to do so, Andrea, because I think I answered those questions during the webinar today, because I want to continue the design thinking. I want to have creative designers that can foster business and foster society by actually have those who need some support in order to take the next step in their education. I will be happy to try to support that. I've been doing that now for 15 years, and I see great pleasure in watching those brilliant design students of figuring out and being creative. So I just think this is a great thing to be able to, in a small way, support the design thinking and particularly the creativity.
Great, thank you, Michael. So as you said, the scholarship has been going on for 15 years, and now is hosted at the House of Innovation. So we have the application period open between 3rd of September and 3rd of October. So it's actually closing this weekend. The requirements to apply to this scholarship are extremely simple. The first thing is that the applicants must have completed their bachelor's program or an equivalent degree, and they should have started or intend to start studying at master's level. Another one is that at least one of the programs should be at a Swedish university. So this is not only targeting Swedish students, it can be an international student that has taken a bachelor's degree or is taking a master's degree in a university in Sweden. And then the third one is that the applicant's portfolio should be based on a collection of work that displays boldness, innovation, and desire to further expand their skills in design thinking. Of course, they also need to show that they have a commitment to social awareness and to sustainability issues. Next slide, Mattia, please.
Yes.
Now the application documents that we require for the application to be valid is a CV, then a letter of motivation where the students explain how the program they are taking or they plan to take relates to design thinking, why they're interested in getting the scholarship, and also a reflection of how they use their background in design to lead people to innovate and to create a positive impact. And finally, a digital portfolio where the applicants include their top 4 works. The size limit of this portfolio is 4 megabytes. We've been receiving a lot of PDFs with that kind of information, and that's okay. How to apply? Super easy. Deadline by 3rd of October, and you just need to send your application documents to the email address that appears on the screen right now, info.hoy@hhs.se. If you want more information, you can check out our website, sschoy.com/mts, or you can send us an email at House of Innovation, and we can help you the best way. Thank you, Mattia.
Thank you, Andrea. And if we have questions on the scholarship, please jump in. How do we run the Q&A? I can see some, we have about 20 minutes, then we have a hard stop at 10. I can see there are some questions in the chat, so maybe we can start with those. And if we have additional time, we can listen to more questions. Is that okay with you, Michael?
Sure, sure.
So we have a question from Carlotta, and Carlotta, feel free to jump in if you need to. Carlotta Manzoni, if you have, if you want to give more information. But you ask, how does this apply to the launch of a business transformation project? What is this in your question?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. The question was posed when you were talking about the experimentation part. So, like, how do you bring this experimentation and prototyping? I see it in a product launch project, but as I work as a management consultant, we always face this. We follow companies bringing to light their projects in business transformation, digitalization of processes, and so, like, I was wondering, how do you bring this approach of experimentation and prototyping to those kind of like projects rather than on a design or on the launch of a product?
Yeah. So when basically users are your employees, and then the innovation output is a new process, a new
yeah, exactly,
technology within the company.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have something to say about this?
No, I think you can add on there, Mattia. You have already said it. I think it's really experimentation and involve the consumers or the users or the customers, and don't be afraid with presenting ugly sketches and ugly prototypes or whatever, and then watch their behavior rather than just watch what they say. You can see if they like it, if there is measure the emotions, figure out are they just polite, but if they add some emotions to it, grab that.
Yeah, I mean, my comment is, you know, at the end, an experiment is a simplified version of reality, not yet complete, that you test in a controlled environment. And I don't see, you know, I would, in a context of a business transformation, in an internal project for improvement, I would just try to think, what are prototypes in this context? Then, you know, whatever you're trying to implement, whether a new technology, or a new process, a new system, a new structure, just start small, start rough. So don't implement everything, just and try to do it in a limited environment, within a department, within a unit, and see what happens before you roll it out to the entire organization, if that's your goal. So I will try to apply the principles of experimentations to the specific context of organizational change. And I don't see why it shouldn't work. So it is true, as you say, that there is not much research or practice when it comes to design thinking for organizational change projects. But when it comes to this aspect of experimentation, I don't see particular challenges. I mean, change management discipline has a lot of tools and insights as to how you can have a step-by-step approach to change, which is consistent with experimenting. We have a question from Anton. How is that measured? And we need, if Anton is still around, we need
sure.
him to say what he means with that.
What were we talking about? Yeah. So you were saying that when you look at the output of design thinking, it's typically difficult to find more radical output from design thinking projects. So you kind of showed facts on questioning the efficiency of design thinking in projects. So then I was curious to see, okay, how do they really measure that? Because when you really have developed this design thinking, then it becomes more of a thinking. It gets just incorporated in your own way of thinking and the team dynamics. So it might be hard to articulate that as a defined stepwise model when it's really integrated, and hence also maybe difficult to say whether this radical product was achieved through design thinking or not.
That's very relevant comment, Anton. Michael, do you want to say a few words about that? Or
I don't think it's important whether it is through the process, through the discipline, or through the creativity, or through design thinking. I think this combination, use all the tools in the toolbox in order to achieve your goals, and don't underestimate the creativity.
But how was it measured when they in this paper that you mentioned, when they claimed that the output was poorly from design thinking project?
No, it's not a scientific paper. It's a blog, I think, on Medium, a blog post, or maybe other kind of articles from the business press. But I can tell you how they came up with this conclusion, basically by looking at articles that have been published, or books that have been published about design thinking by its proponents, going through the examples they make and realizing that, okay, maybe, it's, of course, now I'm exaggerating, but the most famous example of design thinking from the end of the 90s is the shopping cart by IDEO. It's a shopping cart. You saw that in one of my slides. That shopping cart was never used. They went to the supermarkets, used ethnography, and they came up with something that they never see the light of day. So, so it's just anecdotal. It's just a few case studies. So also as a researcher, we need to do a better job. And exactly as you're saying, we need a better job, not only at measuring the outputs, and the outputs might be the result of many things combined. So it's hard to isolate the impact of design thinking, but as you say, measure the cultural impact, the impact on your employees, staff behaviors, and leaders' decisions. So thanks for this comment, Anton. I think it's super relevant.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see the next ones are some comments, no questions. So we will enjoy them maybe at the end of the Q&A, Michael and I privately. But maybe we can, so we have another one from Carlotta. I'd say we give space maybe to questions from other people, if you don't mind, Carlotta. We have Enes asking, what thoughts do you have on companies that more or less explicitly claim the purpose of challenging societal assumptions or norms? These through the supply of alternative radical solutions or marketing techniques like Oatly. For those who don't know Oatly, they make, I know it in Swedish, but not in English, it's well, milk with anyway, with not cows, but cereals. Michael, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm there. I don't have really a strong opinion on that. So please go ahead, yes. Mattia.
So let me reflect on this. What thoughts do you have on companies that more or less explicitly claim the purpose of challenging societal assumptions or norms? NS, are you still around to a little bit maybe articulate your questions?
No, she's not there.
Okay. Well, I have a lot of respect for these companies because you know, a lot of innovation comes from not taking existing beliefs for granted, but challenging them and see them, you know, in a completely different way. So I think that's a key source of innovation. I think that assumptions, industry assumptions, are very tricky because they are things we assume, so we don't spend time and effort reflecting on them. So we move to something else quite immediately, and then we miss out the huge opportunity there is in challenging them, because you have a great opportunity there to differentiate from your competitors, because these are typically industry assumptions. So everyone believes that. So, you know, to answer this question, I relate to the concept of blue ocean strategy, and a lot of companies that are mentioned as being successful companies because they look for blue oceans are exactly companies that challenge industry assumptions, like Cirque du Soleil challenging the circus industry, unfortunately, of course. If I'm not wrong, they're doing pretty bad, even being bankrupt because of the situation today. But anyway, it was a successful story for many years. Southwest Airlines, of course, in the airline industry. So, you know, to conclude, I think it's a key driver of innovation and leadership, the one of challenging existing assumptions in a quite provocative way. What time is it, Andrea? Yes, we still have a few minutes. Peda Mucic, are you still around? Because if you're not, then we should prioritize questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm still here.
Can you tell us about your question?
Yeah, my concern is that design thinking, like some other, let's say, innovative, creative modes for finding solutions for businesses in the past, often when it is merged or incorporated into corporate business, especially, it seems to get diluted in a lot of the things that, you know, Michael was saying as well in his experiences with big corporations, how they come to decisions and what they're concerned about and whatnot. And to me, it seems like the only way for design thinking to really produce what it can produce, it needs to be, let's say, in a way, left alone. It needs to have a cocoon of its own or a space of its own, where corporate is just really giving it some very general guidelines, giving it its own space and time to function. And in fact, it might be even better, in my opinion, to try to incorporate design thinking with small family-run companies that are, let's say, strong in their region, but are looking to globalize, because they're much more, the decision-making there is much quicker and easier. There aren't a lot of external investors that are, you know, putting pressure for things to happen in one quarter. They can think more long-term. And so the people that are doing the design thinking for these small family-run businesses that are looking to break out of their region and, you know, go global, I think that that is a more fertile ground. And that's where I'm putting in this pirate economics, because that's, you know, you need a completely different hierarchy of how decisions are made, who talks to who, and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to hear your opinion on some of these ideas, and Michael's as well, if possible.
Michael, do you, shall I start? Or
I think it's, yes, you have a point, but it's needed everywhere. And I think it's just because it might be more resistance in a big organization, it's still as much needed as in a small organization. And I think this creative thinking, we talk about thinking, we're not talking about necessary processes and discipline and behavior. We're talking about thinking, and that thinking is needed and needs to be embedded in everything we do. And I guess big companies is a federation of small companies. So I think it's, I'm not saying it can be implemented everywhere and at the same speed everywhere, but I think it can start in one corner or start in some parts, but creativity as the main driver is needed everywhere.
And to complement that, I think the issue of how you become a design-oriented organization is very relevant, one that has been overlooked so far. But we start seeing some studies on how you basically transform your organization in a more in a way that is consistent with design thinking. And I can think of the example of well, in general, it has to be top down. First of all, there must be a clear mandate from top executives. They really need to believe that, commit to that, and that then, you know, sustain the transformation throughout the journey, because there will be many moments where the organization and the people will try to get back to earlier ways of doing things. Now, when it comes to what you suggest or mention, the fact of having a, you know, a separate, somehow a cocoon, a separate unit, or at least start there. Maybe, because what a company that has been discussed quite extensively in terms of how they implemented design thinking from the start is Intuit. They are a leading company from the US. Basically, they develop and sell financial software. And the way they implemented design thinking was first by creating an office and some evangelists. So people trained in design thinking and go out in the organization and, you know, train other staff members in, you know, in design thinking skills, and then in how to use design thinking with a few projects, with some selected projects. So they started with few evangelists. Now I think there are more than 1,000. And now I think they managed to reach the entire organization. So it has been a gradual process, but it's one that eventually has influenced every single unit, every single staff member. But this is not, this is a special organization. This is a digital company in its DNA. It's quite early. Sorry, it's quite new as a company, not a startup, but we're not talking about General Electric. So what we don't have much research about still is how you become a design thinking organization when you are, you know, a company with in a traditional industry with a long history and track record, with a pretty strong culture that might not be aligned with design thinking. So we need to know more about that and all the conflicts that design thinking might create. There is some research about how you become an agile organization in General Electric, ING, which is a new European bank, a big one. But agile is not design thinking. They share many principles, but they differ on other ones. So when it comes to design thinking in particular, we need to know more about how you become a design thinking organization. Andrea, it's 10 o'clock. I know we have a few more questions, but we also have an hard stop. I apologize.
I have to actually sneak out now for another meeting. So thank you so much, Mattia, for making this fun, and you did a great presentation. Thanks a lot, and thank you for support of the award.
Thank you, Michael, for participating. Thank you for the great conversation we had. I think, Andrea, we can close it here. Please apply to the scholarship. It's really, you know, a great opportunity to realize your potential, increase your talent, and make an impact. And this is a very promising environment to be. The skills you're growing are gonna be very important in the future, and you can put them in a even more productive use if you have more resources to do so. Thank you everyone for participating, and thank you, Andrea, for helping setting up the webinar, and